interesting. And as we start to get some of our Senate candidates up to speak, I just want to set a bit of an expectation of how we're going to run the next hour and a half or so. I'm going to, first of all, have a little bit of a chat with our Senate candidates as we get to know them. And after that, we will have lots and lots of time for questions. So please wait around. If we don't accept you up to speak straight away, don't lose hope. There will be plenty of time for you to come up and ask questions after we say hello to some of our candidates. But let's start off the night as we're waiting for a few more to join, who I'm sure will join us in the next 5 minutes or so. Let's start off and say hello to Jordan Dittloff. Jordan Dittloff, lead Senate candidate for Victoria. Jordan, I know you quite well, but there are many people in the space who maybe haven't come across you before. Maybe they are living in the other states. Tell us a little bit about who you are and how you ended up at the Libertarian Party and now running for Senate.
So I'm Ballarat born and bred. So I'm born and grew up in regional Victoria. And basically got involved in politics at a fairly early age. I was always interested in current affairs, and we were always encouraged to read widely. We weren't really a very political household, but as I got a bit older, and I remember the 2007 election where John Howard lost government, and I was, I think, 18, maybe 18 at that time. And basically, it sort of got me really interested in politics. I knew it was a really important election and that things were going to change a lot in our country when John Howard lost power. And that turned out to be very true, because in 2009 we had the global financial crisis, and the Labor government under Kevin Rudd responded by giving everyone these sort of handout bonuses that were like, basically just money thrown at people to supposedly offset the financial crisis. But I was working at Officeworks at the time in Ballarat, and everyone just came in. I think it was $1,500 at the time was the bonus, and suddenly all, like, the cheapest laptop was immediately $1,500, and everyone just came in and bought their Kevin Rudd laptops. It was the strangest experience. And then a little bit later in 2010, I joined the Liberal Party as a young Liberal. The next day, I got an email from Sarah Henderson, the candidate in Corangamite, asking if I wanted to come and do door knocking with her and canvass voters. And that began what sort of turned into a 4 or 5 year political apprenticeship, where I got involved in the campaign in that election. And then when that seat, Corangamite, was the most marginal seat in the country in that election, it was about 300 votes in it. I then stayed involved, and in 2013, Sarah ran again, and that time she won. So I left the Liberal Party in 2014. I got very disillusioned with the direction I could see that party going at the time, 10 years ago, and sort of saw where it would end up and has now ended up. And I mainly was sick of this political tribalism, where it was sort of red team bad, blue team good. There was no kind of self-awareness or willingness to look at something on its merits. It was always very political football and very tribal. And that was something I never really gelled with. I was always someone who found myself being able to see both sides a little bit, and to be much more interested in what the merits of an idea were than where it came from or who was proposing it. So basically that departure coincided with a pretty tumultuous time in my life. I had struggles with drug and alcohol addiction culminate with the failure of my small business, and my business failed with quite a number of people who were clients of my travel agency owed money in that collapse. And I actually spent 27 months in prison from a combination of those drug and alcohol and small business related charges. So that was a pretty tumultuous time, and my life kind of unraveled on the public stage. But I used that rock bottom as a foundation to rebuild a new life on. And since then, I've turned my life around. I've completed an undergrad business degree, a postgrad law degree. I've managed several successful small businesses. I've got a beautiful wife and a sort of long-term relationship, and I'm coming up in July 10 years in recovery from drug and alcohol, so totally abstinent from all those things. And I've repaid over $40,000 to people who are harmed by what happened in 2015. So it's been a bit of a whirlwind the last 7 years, and I never thought I would find myself running as a political candidate at the culmination of that journey. But I'm really, really glad that life's taken me that direction, and I've been able to use a lot of my experiences to help other people in the same situation, but also to apply them to what we see in politics now. And the biggest thing I see in politics now federally is a lot of what the biggest problem for me was, which is kicking off hard decisions down the road and basically not dealing with small problems early and then having them become really big problems that are hard to solve later. And that's what I see happening in almost every area of policy federally. So I've definitely had a non-conventional pathway into being a candidate. I've lived a lot of life, and I've taken some skin off and had a few scrapes and bangs and a bit of baggage along the way. But I think what I've found over the last 13 months is that people really respond to that. People actually really appreciate having a candidate who they can relate to and who has tried and failed and made mistakes and learned from them. And yeah, it's been an amazing 13-month campaign. We've run hard. We've campaigned all across the state. We've raised funds. We've had billboards. We've got paid social media advertising now. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what we can achieve. So I really am passionate about pretty much hitting the ground running after the election if I'm elected to the Senate, and starting all the hard work that's going to be needed for 2028 pretty much on day one. So that's me. I'd love the opportunity to answer questions later on if anyone's got more. And if you don't get a chance to ask on this space, I'm always open. You can text in the comments or by DM. And yeah, it's not long now, almost 72 hours left.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Jordan Dittloff, lead Senate candidate for Victoria. If you have questions for him, write them down or pop them in the comments before we invite some people to come up to speak very shortly. Now, let me say hello also to Tyler Green, who is the lead Senate candidate for South Australia. Tyler, hello. Welcome to another space. I know you've spoken to us on a few of these before, but there are, of course, people who are maybe coming across you for the first time. Tell us a little bit about your journey and why you're running for the Senate for South Australia.
No worries. How are you guys? My name is Tyler Green. I'm a married father of three. I have three young children at home. And I've become acutely aware that if we want to have meaningful change in Australia, that it can only be done through the legislative bench. So I'm very interested in achieving the meaningful change that I know that Australia needs. And I know that the Libertarians and myself and others in our party have those viable solutions that, once implemented, can reorientate the trajectory of our nation. So I'm very keen and very excited to be a part of the Libertarian brand and the Libertarian Party. And I know that it's not just about political ideologies, but it's about the implementation of meaningful policy that can reorientate the direction of our nation. So I'm excited to be involved. I very much understand through social activism and social outreach that forming that into a meaningful political arm is the only way we're actually going to achieve meaningful change in Australia. So I continue to champion the political cause and the Libertarian Party, and to seek to encourage Australians to shed their political apathy and to understand that we do have an opportunity and that things aren't set in stone here in Australia, and that we do, with our strong resource base and with the strong I guess, nationalistic spirit of the people that we have, there's an opportunity for Australia to reorientate itself into that prosperous future that we want. So I understand with the energy resources that we have, obviously with the currency alternatives that the Libertarians are proposing, and the ability for Australians to, the dilution and the debasement of our national currency is an important offering from the Libertarian Party. Obviously, that's extremely important to me, and reducing the amount of tax that people pay, and and them getting the opportunity to retain more of what they've worked for. So it's extremely important to encourage people that decentralised decision making is the way forward for Australia, and that centralised governing bodies generally don't understand what life is like on the ground, and that if we can encourage people to take meaningful action, I believe that the die isn't cast, that Australia can return to that prosperous nation that we want it to be. So I'm very encouraged with the policies that the party has, and I'm very encouraged with the responses that the party have had and myself have had campaigning. It seems that the Australian electorate is ready for change and understands that whether we vote blue team or whether we vote the red team, that we seem to be taking a pathway to a similar destination. So the only way that we're going to implement meaningful change is to bring minority parties into that legislative bench and to make sure that we can achieve meaningful amendments to legislation. So I know that reducing of tax and a deregulated marketplace and addressing immigration and addressing the energy subsidies, I know that these things provide meaningful solutions for me and for my children and for everybody else. And people ask me why am I running in politics? I'm socially active because I have 3 young children and a wife, and I'd like to live my life with my wife in my home for the rest of my life. But I would like my 3 young children to have the opportunity to buy their own homes and have their own wives and husbands and daughters and families, just like I've had. And I know that if we continue on the trajectory that we're heading, that they're not going to have that opportunity without immense struggle. So I'm willing to throw the chips down with everything that I have and with the rest of my party participants here, and we're all, Jordan and everybody else, many of us don't come from I guess, the normal political pathway into this activism, but social media and the ability to build a network these days allows those of us who are, I guess, naturally born leaders or have leadership tendencies to be able to find a network to garner some support and then to turn that into meaningful policy. So I'm excited to represent South Australia's libertarians. I'm excited to represent South Australia's libertarian Bitcoiners, and I know that we can achieve meaningful change in Australia, guys. So I'm encouraged by the responses that we're having, and I would like to encourage everybody else to continue on with, as Jordan said, with around 72 hours to go. So that's why I'm running. Be able to look at my children's eyes in 10 years' time and know that I tried my absolute hardest to make sure that they were afforded the same opportunities that I've been afforded in life. And I don't think that's too much to ask for any young person in Australia.
Tyler Green, Libertarian Senate candidate for South Australia. Write down your questions for him in the comments or keep them in mind and come up and ask him a little bit later on. I'm sure, Tyler, there will be many questions about Bitcoin for you. But next, let me say hello to Craig Kelly. Now, it looks like Craig Kelly has dropped down to listener. So while we get him back up, if you can retweet this space, and you can do this by going into the comments section and just retweeting the space like any other tweet on all of Twitter, what this will do is it will give all of your friends, all of your followers, a chance to come in and ask questions of the Libertarian Senate candidates as well. So while we are waiting for Frankie to come back up, Tyler Green, I might start off with a question for you. And I want to ask you about Bitcoin, of course. And I know that is a topic you're very passionate about. Can you tell me what the Libertarian stance is on Bitcoin and why the Libertarian Party holds that stance? Why is it important for Australia to support Bitcoin, Tyler?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. So just to provide a little bit of background as to how the Libertarians got into Bitcoin, I was hawking around a lot of Bitcoin information at a time when I could see that was a viable solution for many of the problems that we have. So to John Ruddock's credit, he actually responded in kind to my overtures to have a political conversation about Bitcoin. So from that, a conversation was had between John and other Libertarians and myself. And some other people who are rolling out Bitcoin roadmaps internationally. So conversation was had there. And then obviously myself and John and the rest of Libertarians have gone back and drafted a white paper, which then has been released into a federal Bitcoin policy. So I don't know how many of you guys have had the opportunity to read through the Bitcoin policy, but the key points of that policy are elucidated very well. It's a very well thought out policy. And I believe that it covers all of the areas that we need to have Bitcoin cover in Australia. So obviously, we're deeply concerned with the privacy settings and the KYC and the Know Your Customer and AML anti-terrorism funding. We would like Bitcoin to be obviously as anonymous as Bitcoin transactions could be, because Australians deserve trust more than they deserve surveillance. Obviously, we're deeply in tune with the Bitcoin mining industry and what frequency control and ancillary services type technologies can offer into our renewable heavy laden grid. So the Libertarians would like to see Bitcoin mining or Bitcoin mining companies encouraged into our grid to help with our energy delivery systems and resiliency systems. And obviously, we're concerned with capital gains taxation, that at this point, mate, it is impossible for Australians, I guess, without some creative accountancy, to be able to use Bitcoin as a viable alternative to currency. So we want to foster currency competition in Australia, because we understand that naturally currency will flow from the weak to the strong, and that we don't need to take away the AUD or deride the AUD, that AUD can stay there functioning as a national currency just fine, and more people will find a naturally retaining of purchasing power and more I guess, enjoyable and efficient experience as they transition over to instant settlement technologies as opposed to delayed settlement technologies. So I'm excited to be part of that Bitcoin policy rollout, because as it stands, when you can only use one national currency inside of Australia, every time Anthony Albanese or Peter Dutton gives a grant to PNG for a rugby team or to Tasmania for an AFL team, or we generate some debt forgiveness, well, that's expansion of our currency base every time. And as that expansion of our currency base occurs, obviously that's more monetary units that's chasing the same amount of goods in the economy. So those goods in the economy have to go up, obviously, in that measured rate. So Bitcoin being a currency that can't be expanded, it is inflation proof. Which just means that no regulatory body or authority can ever add more to the Bitcoin supply, which then places this in an area where it's a deflationary currency. As long as the demand stays there in the use and all other factors being equal, the purchasing power of Bitcoin will increase. And as we can see with the Australian dollar and the price of a carton of eggs in our national debate, that as the Australian dollar is expanded further and further, which they can only pay for the social services they promise via lifting of taxation or the creation of more currency. So either way, they're going to debase our currency base. We are going to have purchasing problems more and more in Australia, and providing viable currency solutions is an extremely meaningful thing to do. And the fact that the Libertarians have done that before any other party means that they understand the currency issues that we have in Australia, that we are brave, bold and courageous to provide an opportunity for Australians to take an exit path should they so choose it.
Thank you very much, Tyler. And of course, if you have questions about Bitcoin, if you have questions that you would like to ask about the Libertarian policy on Bitcoin, leave them in the comments, or in about 10 more minutes, you can come up and ask Tyler yourself. Jordan, I want to go over to you, and I know something that you're very passionate about is free speech. Now, Jordan, where does the Libertarian Party stand on free speech, and why is this so important? And lastly, as a third part to that question, why is the Libertarian position maybe unique on free speech?
So Libertarians basically approach free speech from a principled basis. So we say that really there should be almost no restrictions on what someone can say or read or express. The only threshold or limit should be genuine harm. So that is speech that actually literally harms someone else. And we would say that those instances are very, very few and far between. Hurt feelings isn't harm. Humiliating or insulting or offending someone isn't harm. Even causing someone to be fearful, generally speaking, isn't harm, unless they apprehend actual violence as a result of your words, or you're literally inciting violence specifically towards others. There should be almost no limits on free speech. according to the libertarian view. So we say that free speech isn't just speech to say things that are uncontroversial or easy to say or popular. Free speech of necessity has to support speech that is controversial or dissenting or not widely held, or sometimes even actually incorrect. John Kerry said several years ago, and it's ironic that a Democrat foreign secretary would have been remembered for this, but when he went over to Germany, he said, in America, people have the right to be stupid. Like, you have the right to be wrong. George Brandis here in Australia said, people have the right to be a bigot. And as unpleasant as that is, and as much as I disagree with bigotry, if you don't allow and provide for free speech with those parameters, then you're making artificial exceptions that actually give strength to bad ideas and sort of act to basically grow and give oxygen to ideologies that wouldn't survive the light of day and actual debate on the merits of the ideas. So that's the libertarian position on speech. And we say it's unique because we don't have to go to a focus group or, confer with someone or really, think about these issues. We would always vote no to something that is a restriction on civil liberties like free speech. The best example of that is here in Victoria. The Libertarian Party was the only party to vote against the ban on hate symbols, so the swastika and the Nazi salute, not because we approve of those things, but because I'd rather know who the Nazis are and where they are. And we knew, as immediately happened, that those laws would simply make martyrs out of the NSN and others and be exploited by them for the purpose of propaganda and popularity, which they were. So from a principled and pragmatic basis, libertarians support free speech all the way.
Thank you, Jordan. I'm going to go to a few more questions to give time for Craig Kelly to sort out some unfortunately timed connection issues. Hopefully we can get him up soon.
Yeah, Craig,
If not,
if you can hear us, Craig, you've got an active invitation. You just need to accept the invitation by clicking on the button that looks like two people down the bottom of your phone and then clicking accept.
And of course, if not, we can introduce Craig a little bit later when it begins working for him. But let me go back to Tyler, our lead Senate candidate for South Australia. Tyler, I want to ask about energy in Australia. Of course, rising costs, energy is a big factor for many people when they go to vote this election. Where does the Libertarian Party stand on, for example, the ban on nuclear? And should the Libertarian Party, or does the Libertarian Party support Dutton spending a lot of money on nuclear?
Craig's here as speaker. Excellent.
Perfect. Well, while we're I might
Jordan, are we now coming in loud and clear?
You are, my friend. You are.
Very good, very good, very good. One of the great technical difficulties of some of these things. Good to hear you guys. Good to hear Tyler down there in South Australia. We've been certainly busy travelling all around New South Wales here. So look, I won't talk too much. We want to hear the questions from people that have called in, and let's get in and answer them.
Well, Craig, before we go to some of those questions, and we will start inviting some people up in 5 minutes after we've heard from you, can you tell us a little bit? I'm sure everyone has heard your name before, but tell us a little bit about your journey and why you've decided to run for Senate this election.
Yes, certainly. Look, I ran for the Liberal Party in 2010. I was successful. That was when Tony Abbott was the leader. We narrowly missed out in forming government in 2010. I ran again in 2013 when we marched in the streets with Tony Abbott against the carbon tax, and we had, I think, the biggest victories in Liberal parties in a long, long time. I had to sit there and watch Tony Abbott be undermined in the party through to the 2016 election, where Malcolm Turnbull undermined him and they basically booted Tony out. Then again in 2009, I was successful there, but I became more and more disillusioned with the Liberal Party walking away from their policies. And then during COVID, that was the final straw for me. I saw the Liberal Party abandon all the values and all the reasons that I joined that party and why I was sitting in that party room for. The principles of individualism, protecting freedoms, standing up for the citizen against big government, That was all ditched out the window. And I just sort of thought, I can't sit here and be part of this. So I resigned as a member of the Liberal Party. I went and sat on the crossbenches as an independent. I contested the last election under the United Australia Party. Of course, that Clive, it's a long story. We could write a couple of books about that. And he didn't want to continue it on after the election campaign, deregistered the party. So I think I'm probably at my ideological home now, the Libertarians. And I think many of us are refugees from the Liberal Party that no longer represents the values that we hold. And I've put my hand up to run at the Senate because I'd like to get back into that Senate. One of the most important jobs that a senator does is in that Senate estimates process where you get to cross-examine these government bureaucrats. I've been there for 12 years. I know where the bodies are buried. I would love the opportunity to get in there and question these government bureaucrats and try and hold this next government to account, because by everything the polls are telling us, we're going to be put up with another 3 years of Albanese, and we need a strong opposition in that parliament. We need people in that parliament. They're going to get up and argue against, this absurdity of net zero. They're going to argue for free speech and stand up with, Liberal and Labor hold their hands and vote for that free speech. That was that hate speech legislation. So that's why I've put my hand up to run for the Senate. And we're giving it every chance that we've got here in New South Wales. I just like to take my hats off to all the other guys across all the other states of the great work that they're doing. I see it regularly on social media and share as much as I can. And let's just keep fighting it right up until 6 o'clock on election day.
Thank you very much, Craig. And on that note, I'm going to ask everyone once more before we get into some questions. If everyone in the space can share this space by going into the comments section and pressing the retweet button under the purple box. Now, as you can see, of course, we've started to invite some people to come up for a question. So if you would like to come up and say hello, if you want to tell one of our Senate candidates you voted for them, or if you want to ask a question, please request to speak on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, or of course leave a comment and I'll be reading out my favorite comments as well. Just a bit of housekeeping before we go to our first question from Riza, and that is that unfortunately we may not have time for a back and forth conversation between only one person tonight. So I will ask that you ask your question in full. You can direct it to any of our Senate candidates in general or to all of them. So all I ask is that you ask your question in full so that everyone gets a turn and we're not spending too much time on a single topic when there might be other people waiting to ask a question as well. But Riza, if you have a question for any of our Senate candidates, if you want to say hello or tell them that you voted for them, please go ahead as our first speaker for tonight.
How you going, mate? Thanks for letting me up. Probably pretty a broad question, and anyone can take it. A lot of the policies that Libertarians and I suppose some other parties are campaigning against, whether it be climate change or, different ways where Australia's lost industry and things like that, a lot of it stems back to the World Economic Forum. Some of have been a Young Leaders Initiative and all this sort of stuff. So I was wondering, is there a plan for where the Libertarian Party is going to try in some way to protect Australia from the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll very quickly speak to that. So one of our key policies is that we argue for Australia withdrawing from key treaties or multilateral bodies like the World Health Organization, like the UN, like the Paris Agreement, basically anything that constrains or limits the sovereignty of the Australian government, or actually gives it more power than it should have. In the case of some like World Heritage statutes, for example, that led to the Franklin River Dam case and led to the federal government being able to intervene in what was previously state affairs. So we're very much of that view that we should be against the globalist agenda. There are a lot of benefits that come from globalization and globalism in the sense of the technology and the empowering of individuals, the freedom of movement, and all those benefits. But globalism, in the sense of the globalist agenda and the WEF and all that sort of thing, they're basically the global elites who are manipulating or trying to sort of keep control of global narratives and technology and developments, very much to the detriment of private enterprise and of free people everywhere. So we absolutely oppose those things. And I think it'd be great to hear from Craig how he sees this issue as well.
Craig, if you'd like to add something to that, please go ahead. You'll just have to click the unmute button on the bottom left-hand side of your screen in the shape of a microphone, and then...
Okay, that's got me up. Yeah, look, we should have nothing to do with these World Economic Forums. We've got to make sure that we are doing what is in Australia's best interest. Right? These people, they're controlled by globalists from Europe. They don't give a rat's about Australia. These people have very narrow views of which all involves these people having more centralized control of how we run our lives. So I think that no Australian politician, if I was running the show, no Australian politician would be able to go to a World Economic Forum. And I'd even go further and say, I know we're a party of lower taxes, but I'd say that no politician, no government bureaucrat, and if someone wants to go to the World Economic Forum, we believe you should be free to do so, but don't ask for a tax deduction for it.
Thank you very much, Craig. I see Tyler sending a lot of love hearts and clapping hands. So if you'd love to jump in on this as well, Tyler, please be my guest.
I just think it's an important point to emphasise that decisions made locally is what the Libertarian Party is about. So as Craig and Jordan have said, it's about what's right for our nation, and there's no need for us to have centralised decision-making bodies having input into what the Australian political scene is. So in terms of energy and in terms of free speech and in terms of medical advice especially, that's things that should be worked out here on home soil. So just to add to Jordan and Craig's speech, everybody in South Australia is getting told that centralised decision-making is not the way of the Libertarian Party at all.
Thank you very much for your question, Riza. Now I'm going to go to a question from YouTube. And of course, we are live not only on X in this space, but also on YouTube and Facebook. Dodo102 asks, will you create a BTC reserve in Australia? Tyler, I might go to you for this one.
Well, that's certainly the plan. So as we said before, when we presented in Bitcoin at Bitcoin Alive in March, it was very fortuitous that the day before Donald Trump had announced a US strategic Bitcoin reserve. So we roll our white paper out the next day, and our finishing slide is the attempt at establishing an Australian strategic Bitcoin reserve. So our most important military and trade ally has clearly identified what Bitcoin is and where Bitcoin's going. Howard Lutnick and 21 SoftBank and Jack Mallers and all those guys, the direction of where the American economy is going, they're talking about building base products on top of that blockchain and on top of Bitcoin. So whilst I'd encourage all Australians to pay attention, because via AUKUS and via military engagements that we have with the US, Australian culture a lot of the time tends to follow American culture. So, what they're doing with the gas recovery from the wells and the Bitcoin mining, that's obviously what we need to be looking at integrating into Australia as well. So I'm excited that that's part of our national conversation now, thanks to the Libertarian Party and what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Dodo102 on YouTube for the question. And of course, like and subscribe and reshare and do all the things. Next, I want to go to Opinion in the comments on X asks, question for all candidates. How high on your priorities is the rolling back of the Under-16 bill and the abolition of the E-Safety Commission? Will it be a no-compromise blocker if you have balance of power in the Senate? Craig, I would love to go to you for this one.
Yeah, look, if I was there, successful, that would be one of the first things I would do on day one, would be to get our legislation drafted up to repeal that age verification bill. It is simply a Trojan horse. The idea that it's all to protect the children is complete and utter garbage, right? My 83-year-old mother now is going to have some form of digital ID to log on when she goes onto her social media platform to read about the Libertarian Party and what I've been up with. This is simply a way that they can force us to have a digital ID when we log on, so they will know who we are, right? And be able to track us down. And of course, then this is not legislation by itself. You run this legislation together with the hate speech they will know who every Australian is that's posting, because they'll have your digital ID, and they can come after you, arrest you in your home, as we've seen over happened. This is not conspiracy theories. We're seeing this in the UK today. This is what's happening. It's something like 16,000 Englishmen have been arrested because of Facebook posts. Right? And we are seeing this. This is what's going to happen after the election campaign. None of this will happen before, because they know how people will jump up and down about it. So I'd say day one, if we're successful, that legislation be drawn up, and that would be put into the Parliament as a private member's bill to repeal that legislation. And I'd hope that this time our friends from One Nation would support the repeal rather than abstain as they did last time.
Thank you very much to Opinion in the comment section on X. Now, just a reminder before we go to our next speaker, just so we can get through all the questions, I will ask that you ask your question in full. We unfortunately will not have time for a back and forth conversation, but let's go to Scott Harrison. Scott, did you have a question or anything you'd like to say to any of our candidates?
Hi, Preston. Thanks for calling me up. My question's to any of the candidates. We've got about 4 sleeps to go before the big dance. Win, lose, or draw, Libertarian rank 5 come Sunday morning and going forward over the next few years?
I might go to Jordan for that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously, all of us here on this call and all of the candidates, we're all working as hard as we can to make sure that, as many of us get elected as possible. I would love nothing more than to be sitting on the crossbench with Craig and with Tyler. Tyler's actually got the donkey vote in the Senate ballot in South Australia, so stranger things have happened. And I just think the difference between us and many other Senate tickets around the country are that we know each other, we've spoken with each other, we get along well, and we share ideas and principles. And that's a lot more than can be said for a lot of outfits. And I think it makes a big difference to the idea of how we would be effective and work together. When it comes to the day after the election, the important thing to remember is that the Senate results won't be known straight away. We'll know how we did in the lower house and the seats we contested, but in New South Wales and Victoria, that's not everywhere. And it might be a week or even 2 weeks before we have the final idea of where the Senate's landed. So that's the first thing just to be really mindful of and to manage expectations. For those who are here tonight in the space, or for those who are listening afterwards, just remember there will be a little bit of time where there's a bit of uncertainty and we're not 100% sure what the results will be. But once the results are known, whether we get members elected to the Senate or not, the hard work for the 2028 federal election starts immediately. And that's the difference between our party and a lot of these other parties that really just spring up each election and ask for their members and supporters to give them things or help them, and then they disappear again and they say, now go back to your lives and don't worry about it, let us take it from here. Whether we get senators elected or not, the branches, the community of the Libertarian Party, and the objectives we're working towards in between elections start straight away. So people who might have been coming along to these spaces, getting engaged with the Libertarian Party for the first time online, and maybe having cast a vote for us for the first time, this is really the beginning of your journey with our movement. And it's a pretty exciting opportunity to basically find your people, to have this kind of like tribe community of people with shared values that you can actually catch up with and feel like you're not alone. Because in Victoria, especially, not only is the weather bad, but the socialist darkness is a lot worse. So it can really be beneficial to have like an extended family where your family and yourself can meet with people and really feel part of the community. And in both Victoria and New South Wales, we've also got state elections not far around the corner. So Victoria, the state elections are in November 2026. And in New South Wales, I believe it's March 2027, if I recall. And there's so many opportunities to keep moving the ball forward. If we get senators elected, those opportunities will intensify even more. But, even if that outcome doesn't happen, we're not going anywhere.
Thank you very much, Scott, for the question. Now, I want to come to Tyler for this next one. Bureaucratic asks in the comment section, is there a plan to expand local branches and memberships?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. So obviously in South Australia, it's a very grassroots thing at the moment, mate. So we have regular branch meetings. So I was going to say to add to Jordan, as soon as the election's over, guys, I guess it's about being as close to that branch meeting as you want to be. If you want to be actively involved, then please reach out to the support staff that are part of those branches, because I know that here in South Australia we only have the one branch, and my president and my secretary and the other people in my party, we would love to bring more people into that branch party, monthly or quarterly meetups, and make sure that as we have a state election campaign to run in 2026, that a big part of what we're doing in South Australia is getting the brand in place and notoriety, and building a healthy home branch and regular branch meetups, so that we can have a real tilt at 2026 here in South Australia as well. So yeah, if you're in Adelaide or wherever you are locally, please reach out to the libertarians that you know, and get around a regular meetup and a regular catch up, because as Jordan impressed upon everybody, the culture of a libertarian is absolutely fantastic. So everybody gets the opportunity to be heard and to put their point forward, and that's again one of my favorite parts about being a libertarian, is you will get your 5 minutes on the floor to put your point across. So please, everybody, get actively involved in a home branch and wear that libertarian shirt around, or your merch, with pride, because at the end of the day, what we want to see is localized communities making their own decisions and being responsible and being free, and that comes from confident, intelligent, articulate Australians living that life that they want to live. So please get involved in a branch meeting and in a branch culture, because the libertarians really are coming to change things in Australia. And it's really, I guess, encouraging and important to get involved in those initial stages, because those initial stages are where you can have an oversized impact, and an impact that, when we go on to change things in Australia, guys, I tell you, this federal election in 2025 is something that we'll look back on. And then what we do next year and in the coming years is when we really start to reorientate Australia. So, shed that apathy. And if you've got anything to give, I'd encourage you to give it.
Thank you very much, Tyler. I think we may have lost the last word or two in that, but very, very important as well. Now, just a reminder, as we go to some of these hands, I will ask everyone to ask their question in full, so that we can get through to as many questions in the time we have as possible. But next, let me say hello to Mick. Mick, did you have a question for any of our candidates in particular, or in general, or would you like to say anything to them?
Thanks for having me up. I'll actually be very brief. My question is a question that I know, but it's probably a question for the room in particular, for the candidates, or anyone really. It's just more so for a bit more education for others that may not know. There seems to be a correlation that a lot of people believe that the Libertarian Party in Australia believes that the philosophy of the Libertarian Party in America, which is the open borders policy. Now, I think it would be good for one or the other, someone to address these comments that I keep continually seeing in my reply sections, to correlate, what the Libertarian Party in Australia stands for and its difference to the US on this matter, if that's okay. I think it'd be good to get some clarity on that, to put that out there on record.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, the first thing to say is that even in the US Libertarian Party, there's a big divergence of views. So people like Dave Smith, Jeremy Kaufman, and others are very much not proponents of open borders. And so, yeah, so even in the American libertarian movement, it's by no means the standard sort of accepted position, and things are shifting over there as well. In our party and in Australia, we've never had an open borders policy. Without getting personal or attacking other parties, Pauline Hanson likes to say to other people that that's our policy. She's done that for a couple of elections in a row, unfortunately, and it doesn't have any correlation to reality. The fact is that libertarians don't believe in unfettered access to to national borders. We think that as long as the welfare state exists, that's an important limitation on the free movement of people, because you've got a big distortion to the push and pull factors of why people come and what the consequences for publicly owned goods and services and infrastructure are for that immigration. So basically, the answer to who owns railroads, roads, services is every taxpayer, current and historical. So we all have property in public goods, and we all have the right to refuse unwanted guests if we don't want to have them. So libertarians definitely don't believe in open borders, and we propose actually quite a similar policy to what Trump has got in place, where he's got this gold card in America, which is quite a high migration fee. His fee is like millions of dollars, so he's like a very high-end version. Ours proposes a pretty high migration fee compared to what we have now, where prospective migrants would pay, it'd be determined by auction, but it'd probably be in the vicinity of about $100,000 to basically become a permanent resident here. The other really important step in the libertarian policy is that we'd be looking at a intake of 1% of the existing population, then take away the amount of people that leave each year, which is around 130,000 or so. So you'd be left with an intake each year, net overseas migration of around between 70,000 and 100,000, which is a really significant reduction on what it is now. And the composition of those numbers would be based on who is in a position to basically come to this country ready to contribute. We also believe that citizenship should be reserved for people who have been here for at least, for basically 10 years with good behaviour. So that is a long period of time. It's actually 2 years longer than One Nation's policy. So One Nation says 8 years, we say 10. And basically we say that the welfare state shouldn't be available to anybody other than citizens. So you should have 10 years, you should come here ready to work, you should be here as a law-abiding citizen for 10 years, as a law-abiding resident for 10 years, then become a citizen, then get access to the welfare state. So it's just recognising that our country is a great place to live and it's a desirable place to travel to. And over in the US, Trump has single-handedly raised a huge amount of money towards their deficit from his gold card. And if we looked at an intake of about 1% per year and a fee of about 100,000, you'd be looking at $26 billion that'd be saved on the budget, and that'd be going a long way towards budget repair as well. And the other really good thing our policy facilitates is it encourages the idea of sponsorship. So if you had a genuine skills shortage and you had a company in Australia who really couldn't find someone local, then they might be prepared to pay that $100,000 migration fee to bring someone with a set of skills over. But the difference between what happens now and what would happen then is what happens now is the government just brings people over based on what they say are the skills shortages. And then those people just compete in the domestic market with everyone else, and they're driving Ubers and things in the meantime. We've all had those experiences where you've got, I've met more engineers and physicists driving Ubers and taxis than I have actually doing their job. And this would basically be putting skin in the game for business and encouraging business to say, okay, well, if what it costs me to bridge a gap that I say exists is 100 grand, do I want to invest 50 grand in the domestic training market? Do I actually want to, invest in TAFEs and universities and train the skills I need? It's actually encouraging businesses to look at bringing in overseas workers to fill skills gaps as a real cost, not as just something the government will do for them for free. And similarly with issues like asylum seekers and charitable migration, if a church or a philanthropic organisation or the Greens or whoever want to bring over someone who's from a war-torn part of the world and they want to pay the migration fee, then they've got a huge vested interest in looking after that person and making sure that person succeeds. So we say rather than outsourcing charity and, asylum obligations to everyone, to the public, we say that should be done by private charity as well.
Thank you very much, Mick. Before we go to our next speaker, just a reminder, I will ask everyone to ask their questions in full. Of course, we're live on YouTube, X, and Facebook. So we have questions coming in from 3 different platforms, which I will get to some of the comments very, very shortly. But before I do, I want Jim, did you have a question for any of our Senate candidates?
I did. Thank you. As one of the aforementioned physicists, come digital infrastructure engineers that was mentioned, I'm just wondering what you guys think, or whether or not you guys have considered the next steps that need to be taken I see a large, what's the word, disenfranchisement of the general population, as general as that may be. And I'm wondering if any of you guys see a future where we can ditch the Westminster system and move to something closer to a hybrid between a republic and a direct democracy. I know there's a lot of talk around Bitcoin. It's something that I endure quite considerably at my work. And there are a lot of benefits to having a more decentralized form of government that maybe we need to move towards. It's something that a lot of people that I speak to have discussed in the last couple of years, whether or not there's some other experimental form of government that we need to be testing to try and figure out how Australia fits into the international structure of the world. Just looking for you guys' thoughts on this one.
I would love to hear from Craig on this one.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think a few issues that we do have with our democracy. One is the overweight that the ABC has. Now, the ABC, I know here in, I think, New South Wales has given us virtually no coverage at all. I think down there in Victoria, you got, so the only time they've covered you, Jordan, down there was they said that you're an extremist down there.
I know they did, they did.
Yeah, and they put your signs up and played some like scary music over the top sort of thing. You
know?
I
thought it looked great, to be honest. I thought it made it look pretty good.
So you've got an overdominance of the ABC, $1 billion worth of public money going into it. Okay. The other issue I think you've got is that the way the major parties have rigged the game in their favour. And I talk about that with the public funding. So everyone, there's I think this election about $3.80 that gets attached to everyone's vote in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Right? So if as a party running, you get $3.80 for every vote you get, but there's a threshold of 4%. So it makes it often the minor parties are not sure whether we're going to get 4% in the Senate. We might be on the verge of getting 4% in the lower house. So we're really not sure about how our funding is going, is where the major parties know they will definitely get 4%. So let's just take that here in New South Wales. What have we got? Something like 5 million voters. So say the Liberal one party gets, say, 40%. What's that? 2 million votes, right? That means $3.80 or say $4 by 2 million votes. That gives them $8 million to spend on their election campaigns. As we're the Libertarians, we can't be guaranteed a cent. Then you've got the advantage of incumbency, where you've got, as an incumbent member of Parliament, say I'm going out and campaigning against the Senate candidate for the Liberal Party and for the Labor Party and for the Greens, right? They're all getting full pay, right? Jordan and I, myself, have all taken time off work to do this out of our own pocket. We travel around, we pay for it out of our own pocket. Albanese and Dutton have got the private planes, government-funded planes to fly them around the place. So you've got all that sort of encouraging the incumbency, which makes it very difficult to beat. That's where I think the issues are that we need to look at, to try and make sure our elections are truly more democratic by giving a lot of the minor parties, a much leveler playing field to compete on.
There are a couple of other things I just wanted to quickly touch on as well that I think might help answer this question. One of them is our policy for recall elections. So one really important, pretty game-changing thing that I think we could introduce into our democratic system is that policy of, with a certain threshold, the people being able to actually call for a recall election if the government is doing things in their name that they don't have a mandate for, that they don't approve of. If we had a recall election over an issue like The Voice, the time and money wasted on that referendum might not have had to proceed, when the result was so obvious and so clearly overwhelming in the end that we went through this whole, self-humiliation ritual almost of the referendum, just to be told we're all racist and terrible and for it to be ignored anyway. And the final thing I would say is that the Libertarians basically believe that government should be as small as possible and as local as possible. So federalisation or federalism is a really powerful force that the Australian Constitution provides for, but that has kind of been overridden by a lot of the overreach of the federal government and the growth of the federal government over the past 100 years. And once we get that right, we've got each state providing a competitive driver against each other state. But we would also love to see more smaller states. So we've got things like the Riverina State Project. We've got things like Rexit, which Tim Quilty in Victoria has talked about before. And that's the idea that we can have smaller states, especially in the regions where the needs and desires of people on the border between New South Wales and Victoria, like Albury-Wodonga, Echuca Moama, all those sort of border towns where you've got these towns that are artificially split into by a border. They've got way more in common with each other than they've got in common with Melbourne City or Sydney City. And they should be able to, make their own rules and laws and things that benefit their citizens. So I think that there's lots of opportunities for more decentralisation to the state level and making the federal government smaller, but also potentially making more smaller states, like probably abolishing council, local government, and making more smaller states. That's what I think a really good answer would be as well.
Thank you for that question. Now, we are very close to 200 listeners, so I want to invite everyone who is listening to this space right now to retweet this space by clicking on the purple button down the bottom right-hand corner of your screen and clicking the retweet button. Next, I would love to go to Melbourne Freedom. Before you go ahead, Melbourne Freedom, just a reminder, I will ask everyone to ask their question in full. Unfortunately, because we are taking questions from multiple platforms, we don't have the ability to do a back and forth conversation. But if you would like to ask your question in full, Melbourne Freedom, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Preston. I'd also like to thank Jordan for speaking at the No More Uniparty rally just this Saturday. He did a great speech, and we'll be sharing the speech soon. Obviously, Jordan already filmed it, so check it out if you haven't. My question is, I've been a long-time supporter of an Australian Bill of Rights, and I know it's one of the policy platforms of the Libertarian Party that you guys would be generally in favour of this. So my question is sort of in two parts. Does the Libertarian Party currently have any kind of written document as to what they would want to include in a potential Australian Bill of Rights? Number one. And number two, if not already written, what would be the idealized, if you were designing it sort of from now onwards, what would be the process by which the Libertarian Party would support the rollout of a Bill of Rights referendum, the writing of it? What would that sort of process to deliver this outcome sort of look like if you guys were designing it from a position of, say, minority government, and the major party that we were in minority with was agreeing with this and agreed to put it to a referendum? What would that sort of look like? Thank you.
For this one, I don't think we've heard from Tyler for a while. Tyler, if you'd like to jump in on this one.
Well, I was probably going to say Jordan or even Rob McCarthy might be probably the best, a better party to answer this one, Preston, if that's all right, mate.
That's perfect.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's go to Jordan.
Look, so what COVID showed us was that a state or a legislative Bill of Rights, like we have in Victoria. So Victoria has a Charter of Human Rights. It's an act of Parliament. And as an act of Parliament, Parliament can change it, can ignore it. It doesn't necessarily have the teeth that it needs. And we saw through COVID, a statutory Charter of Rights is no guarantee against tyranny. And in Victoria, it was completely useless. The government basically, passed legislation and took actions that totally ignored the provisions of the Charter. The way the Charter is worded in Victoria is the right way. The Libertarians believe that we should be talking about rights in a negative rights sense. That is, rights that limit what the government can do. So rights that basically aren't entitlements, to say that I have a human right to have food and shelter and a home. That's the kind of way the left often talk about rights, is that positive rights, like I deserve or I should have. The way that we think about rights is that, government shouldn't be able to take from us or restrict things. So that kind of negative language is the way you would want to do it. And I think that you would need constitutional reform and you need a referendum. In America, they have that separate document because those documents were both created at the same time and they have almost equal standing. But in the Australian context, it's either got to be a law or it's got to be a constitutional reform. And so, as difficult as constitutional reform can be, I think that negative rights that have the force of law in Australia should be through constitutional change. Now, I think that the best way to do that is likely going to be one bite at a time. I know that there are a lot of people who really would love for us to snap our fingers and to have all the rights that they have in America straight away. But history has shown, especially where there's opposition from one or more parties, like usually for a referendum to pass, it needs bipartisan support. And for something like this, left to fight pretty hard for bipartisan support. So I think the best way to do it would be one sort of right enshrined in the Constitution at a time. And I think that the most important one to start with is probably free speech, because we actually already have an implied freedom of political expression in the Constitution, but that's kind of been almost made up by the High Court and interpreted into the Constitution rather than a really clear negative right. So because that confusion exists and because the High Court has already acknowledged that that's a part of a representative democracy, I think that's the lowest hanging fruit. That's the easiest place to start. It's still going to be a huge battle. But if we can get that constitutional protection for free speech in place, that'll actually knock over a whole bunch of these 18C hate speech laws, social media restrictions for kids. All of those laws, if we could get the constitutional reform in, would basically become unconstitutional with that reform, or outside the power of the government to make. So that's kind of like you take the legs out from the table and the table falls. So I think that that incremental approach is the right way to do it. I think it does have to be constitutional reform because we've seen that a law can just be modified or ignored by Parliament, whereas change to the Constitution has to be heeded.
Thank you very much, Melbourne Freedom. Now, Jordan, I want to stick with you for this next one. And this next one is not so much a question, but rather a comment from Michael Dixon on YouTube, who says, I really don't like the two-party preferred system at all. I think it's become so outdated and I no longer trust or have any confidence in the Labor or Liberal Party. Jordan, let me formulate a question around that for you. Is this a attitude that you're seeing among many, many people? And what would you say to people who feel like Michael?
So Michael, if this is the person I'm thinking of, actually is from Victoria and contacted me to let me know that he'd always voted Labor and the Greens in the past, and he never really sort of sat and kind of unpacked why that was. Like, he thought he was doing the right thing in voting for a principal party that cared about people. But over time, as he's kind of thought about it and realised what they've done versus what they sort of say on the package, so to speak, he's at a point where he's really open to looking at parties like ours for the first time. So thank you for asking the question, Michael. I'm pretty sure you are who I recall, who's contacted me before. And I hope that you either have already or soon vote One Libertarian, because it's a huge journey to come on that journey of, I suppose, political self-awareness or development, whatever you want to call it. And the reality is we don't actually have a two-party preferred system. Like, that's the way it gets reported. That's the way the AEC, or that's the way polling talks about it. But there's no such thing as a major party. Like, there's nowhere in any legislation ever will you find a definition called major party. The Libertarian Party and the Liberal Party are identical in terms of like the rights and obligations they have and the legislation and how it deals with this. The only difference is that people think there's a difference, and people historically have voted for one party more than the other. But there's absolutely nothing to stop a so-called minor party from eventually becoming a major party. And we've seen lots of instances where, even though unfortunately it's been on the wrong side of politics, where the Teals have actually challenged one of the so-called major parties and actually become that main competitor. It might happen in a seat like Hunter, for example, in New South Wales this time, where the One Nation candidate there has a pretty good chance. Similarly, in Victoria, someone like Russell Broadbent, or in New South Wales, someone like Matt Kamanzuli, who's challenging Chris Bowen in the seat of McMahon. Those kinds of people can become that second party in the two-party preferred race for how the votes are counted. So I think that honestly, the biggest takeaway I've had, and I know Craig feels the same about this. I wouldn't mind actually getting his thoughts on this because I saw him talking about it earlier today. If you look at the way Sky News is basically just running this complete shilling denial campaign for the Liberals and increasingly One Nation, like because One Nation aren't really a threat to the Liberals, and Gina likes them and has sort of decided they're not a threat to Dutton. So, like, you might be forgiven for thinking that Sky News doesn't like the Libertarians and People First very much, because we haven't got any airtime whatsoever from them during this whole campaign, like 13 months. And I think that's a bit of an indictment on not only the mainstream media, but the so-called, alternative right media as well. Craig, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because I know you've got some.
Yeah, look, we have a preferential voting system, which you don't confuse that with the sort of two-party system we often hear about. The preferential voting system that we have actually gives an advantage to the independents and smaller parties. I'll give you an example. We saw that at the last election, where here in Sydney, in the seat of Fowler, that Di Lee, as an independent, defeated Labor's Christina Keneally. Now, if that was first past the post, Christina Keneally would be the member for Fowler from the Labor Party instead of Di Lee. But when you take in the preferential system, that enabled Di Lee to defeat her when she was clearly a more favoured candidate in there. So we've got to keep the preferential system. Where this two-party system comes from is the way the media covers it, especially the mainstream media. They cover the election campaign so much as a presidential contest between Albanese and Dutton. And the minor parties really do get squeezed out. And that really is an issue for, I said, previous democracy. It also goes to the way I said previously in my previous answer, the way that the major parties have rigged the system, that they get all this electoral funding that they get guaranteed with, that the minor parties don't get. So the major parties their campaigns all run by taxpayer money, basically. Where where libertarians and the minor parties, we've got to do it all basically on volunteers. So it really stacks the playing field, favouring the major incumbents. But let's not confuse that with the preferential voting system, which really does give us, as smaller minor parties, a better chance.
Now, Tyler, I want to bring you in on this one as well. Before I do, thank you everyone for your patience. But Tyler, is this the kind of thing you're hearing out at polling booths, pre-poll? Is it the kind of thing people are telling you that they've had enough of Labor and Liberal and they're looking for a different option?
Absolutely, Preston. So yeah, as I said, earlier, the successful conversations that are had at the polling booth are really encouraging. I would say that there is and obviously I was on the polling booth for the last election as well, and even during COVID, and obviously we saw the Labor Party return a fairly strong win last time. So I would suggest that polling booths are very different this time, mate. That there's many positive conversations had about the inability of the major parties to deliver the solutions that Australia needs. So, one of my lines at a polling booth was, if the major parties had the solutions, then they would have already delivered those solutions. So it's time that other parties in Australia are given the opportunity to campaign and to get their policies put forth. So yes, I would suggest that there's a good tone in Australia, that there is a departure from those major two, and that whether you're a Labor voter or a Liberal voter, generally that potentially your interests are not traditionally being represented anymore. So I guess, as Jordan has said and as Craig has said, many traditional Liberal voters who probably feel unrepresented are moving over to that Libertarian Party. And look, I'm having many conversations with people who are minority voters here in Adelaide that are asking me why they should vote our party over another. And when you kind of lay out the decision making and the freedom and the responsibility, and I guess, and the genuine answers that the Libertarian Party have with the energy subsidies, the immigration issues, and the reduction of tax, that finds resonance with people very quickly. So it doesn't take much to tell a person, would you like to keep more of what you earn, and would you like to retain more of your earning potential each week and each month, so that you can make the decisions for your family and the direction of your family as you move forward. So yes, Preston, overly positive in terms of minority voting. And look, whilst the polls are telling us that Labor are going to do it in a canter, I'm definitely not so convinced. I think that what we'll start to see is that the continual of the, I guess, departure from that main party to representative system, which should encourage all of us to have those meaningful conversations on the ground and to engage in your community groups. Because when you espouse libertarian theory and when you espouse libertarian policy, it can certainly cause people to take stock and to have a bit of a think over the decision making that they're having in their lives. So I'd encourage the people who are even considering, I guess, volunteering for Libertarian Party who are interested in libertarian ideals, please continue to throw your hat in the ring with us because we need that help. And as I said before, we can have an oversized impact in terms of reorientating Australia back into the freedom and the prosperous nation that we know it can be.
Thank you very much, Michael Dixon on YouTube, for that comment. And of course, just a reminder, we are live on YouTube, Facebook, and X. I will ask that our speakers ask their question in full so that we can get to everyone. But let's go to Koalas next.
Thank you, mate. My questions to any of the candidates. What can be done about the corruption within our national security apparatus and the weaponisation of surveillance against innocent Australians to commit lawfare and enact a UN ideological indoctrination campaign against children under the false pretense of protection, undermining parental rights and violating human rights?
I would love to start off by going to Jordan on this one.
Yeah, I think that we absolutely believe that the responsibility of parents and the input of parents is paramount. We think that far too often you are seeing this trend of parents almost being treated as inconvenient or even dangerous to their own kids' best interests. And that's just obviously so anti-human and runs completely counter to you know, the normal bonds of family and the idea of parental responsibility. We think that you are the best person to make decisions for your family, and we support those decisions being decentralised from everything from education policy with our school vouchers to our policies around parental rights when it comes to children, their ability to consent to puberty blockers and social transitioning and all this kind of thing. Because in Victoria, we've seen many of these things have been taking place actually explicitly hidden from parents and without any input from parents at all. So absolutely libertarians support the rights of the parent and believe that parents should have a far greater say in every aspect of their child's life. And we absolutely would oppose things like the social media age restriction laws, which basically the ability of parents to make a decision about what their kids consume, and it puts the government around the kitchen table and you're being a co-parent with the government. So we absolutely oppose those things.
Tyler, did you want to add anything into that? Maybe especially when it comes to surveillance and things like digital ID.
Well, look, I was just going to add into the fact that we're a homeschool family, so I'm a homeschooling parent, and I think the point that I want to get across as a libertarian is that parents retain agency over their children. So it's really important that the state understands who a child belongs to, and I think, look, COVID was a big example of where we can get this kind of wrong. And I'm deeply concerned with an issue that Russell Broadbent has brought up in Parliament, which is the coercive social payments made to parents in Australia withdrawn unless they meet vaccination status. So Russell, I guess, made a statement in Parliament that Australia is the only nation on the planet that uses coercive social payments to get people to hit a vaccination schedule in Australia. So, look, that's deeply concerning. I'm a massive free choice advocate. I believe that responsible parents and families make the right decisions for their children and guide their families in the way that they want them to, and that's a God-given right that nobody should be able to take away from anybody else. So I want to I'm happy to put it on the record that parental rights are a deeply important issue to the Libertarian Party, and the Libertarian Party believes that you have agency over your children, and it's your responsibility to guide them and to direct them into the right choices. So education choices are an extremely important part of my life and my family and the families that we interact with. And obviously surveillance is a massive part of that. I firmly believe that parents are the ones to make the right decisions for their children, that the state shouldn't be in the lounge rooms and the bedrooms of our citizens, and that it's a mother and father's right to decide if their child should have access to the internet and to social media. And further to Craig's point, I think we know that the digital ID is the Trojan horse, or the under 16 surveillance bill is the digital Trojan horse for the rest of us to be able to obtain a digital identification to have access to the internet. So as a Libertarian, personally, as a Libertarian Party, I can certainly promise to advocate that those choices will always be defended, and that surveillance in Australia is not something that I want to see personally, and not something that the party wants to see, and not a legacy that I want to pass down to our children in any way, shape or form. So voting for the Libertarians means that you are voting for personal privacy protections in Australia and parental choices to remain primary in the lives of Australian families.
Thank you very much for that question. As I go to our next speaker and remind everyone to ask their question in full so that we can get to as many people as possible, I'd also love to ask everyone one last time in this space to retweet the space by going down to the comments section in the bottom right and retweeting it like any normal tweet on the rest of X. I want to go to Mepit next.
Good evening, friends. My name's Matt. I'm from South Australia. So my comments are directed at Tyler and other South Australians. I have an interest in the freedom parties, some of which the Libertarians are in an alliance with. I just wanted to extend the opportunity for some networking with like-minded people tomorrow night. I'm not sure if you're across this one, Tyler. And I actually don't even know, unfortunately, if this party is kind of in an alliance with you, but I know that Robert Loney from People's First will be there. It's called Australian Christian Lobby. It's tomorrow night at the Life Christian Centre, Angus Street, Adelaide. If people are looking to come along. Regardless, Tyler, I'll be reaching out to you. I'm good friends with the South Australian, colleagues with South Australian Libertarians. And I'll be looking forward to doing a lot of work with you ongoing in the future with this movement. It's really positive to know that some people are aware of what's needing to be done and doing the hard work, and it's much appreciated.
No, absolutely appreciate the encouragement, mate. And look, further to your comments, freedom of religion is an extremely important thing for myself, an extremely important thing for my family, an extremely important thing for the party. So I think the ideal that needs to be expressed there, mate, is the ability for you to live your life in the fashion, in the manner that you want to live it. So what worship looks like and what a religious experience looks like is essentially the individual's business. So, freedom of religion is an important part of my life, and yeah, if you want to PM me off to the side, mate, we can certainly have a chat about catching up. No worries.
Thank you very much for that question, Mepit. Next, I want to go to Steve-O.
Yeah, g'day. Just wanted to ask any of the candidates how they felt about our election integrity. The pre-polling really worries me sometimes. We just had an election in WA. The only thing that was provided there was pencils. And perhaps maybe has anyone ever considered, or I know it's been considered, but is there any serious thought by the Libertarians to discussing blockchain voting? Thank you.
Let me go to Craig on this one.
Yeah, firstly, I don't want to see anything voting. I want to see nothing electronic. It must be a paper system where there is complete traceability of the ballot paper from the time it's given to you until it's put in the ballot box until it's counted. Now, that's why I think there's some concerns over the pre-poll, because there's a transferring of votes from pre-poll booth to some centralised office. And we saw some images at the New South Wales state election, at the last federal election, where they probably weren't done in the secure manner that they should have been done. There should have been like a full a chain of security from the time they left the polling booth. So we saw a lot of them going in like private cars with no real checking or balances on them. I must admit, I have some reservations about the way pre-poll is starting to work in this country. Pre-poll was originally meant to be for people that couldn't vote on election day because they have other work commitments. It's turned into a free-for-all where the voting actually now is spread over 2 weeks. We like to have more than probably half the population that's voted before election day. I don't think that's, the election day is meant to be the 3rd of May, not a 2-week period where people vote. So I think that's firstly one thing we need to look at, but there does need to be a greater security. Otherwise, look, I know no one's got a bigger beef against the AEC than I have in this country after they took me to court and wasted $1 million of taxpayers' money running a completely frivolous and malicious prosecution over the font size on my core flutes. The whole thing was just an absolute farce of the AEC. But I think otherwise our election system is not too bad. I'd like to see people have to show some ID to get your ballot paper.
Now, I may have lost Craig Kelly. I'm sure Jordan will let me know if it's just me. But Craig, if we can get you back, I think we may have just lost that last sentence from you.
Unfortunately, this is a fairly common occurrence when it comes to Craig in spaces. But look, I would say that I think pre-poll has turned into something that is leveraged over the minor parties. I think that the way that the pre-poll has kind of turned into this sprawling 2-week thing with no reason required to vote early kind of works into the hands of the major parties who have these massive resources compared to the minor parties. So I do think that there should be more voting on the day. I don't think that pre-poll should be as long as it is or as permissive as it is. And when it comes to newer technology, I think that there are opportunities using new technologies that are more secure, that don't require, trust through the parties involved, like the blockchain technology that supports Bitcoin is a great example of that, where there's no trust required for the system to function. But I do think there should always be a backup. It should never just be an entirely digital process. There should always be the both components of it.
I don't think we have Craig back just yet, so let me stick with you for a comment. We may have Craig. Craig, if you'd like to just
yeah, sorry. Yeah, I picked my line dropped out. I think I was saying what Jordan said. This pre-poll has actually become what it's not meant to be. Pre-poll is meant to be a period where someone that could not turn up on election day because of some work commitment could vote in advance. It says it's turned into a free-for-all. Now, they're meant to say, you meant for pre-poll, why can't you vote on Saturday? But there doesn't seem to be any rules at all on that. It's just going to be open slather. That's something I think we need to look at going forward. Otherwise, look, our election system is not too bad. I think there's a good case that the pre-poll period should be greatly reduced. I'd also like to see ID, that you get your ballot paper. I said those that argue for digital ID to online are the ones that say, no, you don't have to have any ID to vote. By having an ID system to vote, that actually completely eliminates the opportunity of double voting, which currently exists in Australia. Let's say, what was the old Labor Party saying? Vote early, vote often. That completely eliminates that possibility if you have some type of ID. But I think we always must have paper ballot papers. That way you can tip them up on the desk at the end. You can have scrutineers. And if there's any sort of discrepancy in the numbers, it's quite easy to pick up and check to see where something has gone wrong.
Thank you very much, Steve-O, for that question. Jordan, I want to come to you for this next one. Jay Cremo says on YouTube, I'm scared to volunteer at the polling place. I'm worried I wouldn't be able to answer questions properly. Jordan, I was feeling this way before I went on the pre-poll place for my first time. What would you say to people who feel like Jay Cremo and how I felt as well?
Yeah, look, I think that it seems really scary. Like it seems like you're kind of putting yourself as the face of the party, or that what you might say could be misinterpreted, or you might get things wrong. The truth is that most people at pre-poll pretty much just want to get in and vote. They will usually take a how to vote card, but there's really not a lot of opportunity for conversation. They're not really sitting and having a chat to you. You might have a couple of short words you can say to them. Today, I was saying Libertarian Party, smaller government, lower taxes, or Libertarian Party, minor party option for the Senate. That's about as long as you've got. It really, even as the candidate, you're not having many long-form conversations with punters at pre-poll. So having said that, it's also a great opportunity to learn. And you can certainly ask to be on a booth where you've got a more experienced volunteer with you. I think we could do a better job of that. I think one of the, we're obviously still got a couple of days to go, but volunteer support and training volunteers to the point where they feel confident in assisting with campaign activities. I think that's a really big learning curve for us as a party, and really investing in that will be beneficial ahead of state elections. But yeah, there's nothing to be scared of. It makes a huge difference just to have a smiling face, and just to ask, just to have a conversation with people and be a friendly face that they see. Preston today, I saw him, he was actually explaining, there was one couple that was their first time voting, this young couple, and Preston explained to them about the green ballot and the white ballot. I don't know if they voted Libertarian, but having a friendly face who's not kind of pressuring them as because some of the other parties can be quite aggressive. Sometimes it's just about being a friendly face and giving someone a positive association before they go in to vote.
I will say, just offering to pat someone's dog or saying hello to someone in a kind way makes a huge difference and can really help out. So let's go to our next hand. Daniel, would you like to ask a question of any of our Senate candidates? You will have to, if you haven't been on a space before, you will have to press the unmute mic button down on the left-hand corner. I will just check in with Daniel one last time, and if not, Daniel, you can press the speaker button on the left-hand corner. I'll give you another 10 seconds, otherwise we'll move on. Well, it looks like we've lost Daniel, but let me go to Linton. Linton, I will just give a quick reminder. I'll ask everyone to ask their questions in full so we can get through as many people as possible without doing a back and forth. But Linton, if you'd like to ask a question in full to any of our candidates, we have Jordan Dittloff, candidate for Victoria. We have Tyler Green, candidate for South Australia, and we have, of course, Craig Kelly, candidate for New South Wales. Linton, go ahead.
G'day everyone, thanks for that. My question is just about, in the scenario where there might be a balance of power, where perhaps Libertarians might have some control, what would their strategy be with working with other independents and the other parties that are potentially going to be there, the Greens, Jared Rennick and the One Nation Party? They're all going to have completely different ideas about what should be done. So what's the strategy there if that should happen?
Well, the really interesting thing is that they might not have as completely different ideas as you think on some issues. So for example, on the misinformation disinformation bill, the Greens actually voted against that legislation for completely the wrong reasons, as we would see it. They thought that it didn't go far enough and there wasn't a digital duty of care and all this other bullshit, basically they wanted to be more draconian, but they did vote against it. And sometimes you've got to be willing to work with other parties where the outcome is what you want, even if they're people you'd normally disagree with. And I think this is actually where parties like One Nation tend to get into trouble sometimes, is, for example, with the hate speech legislation recently is the most recent example, but there have been others. They don't want to be seen sitting on the same side of the chamber voting against something as the Greens. They dislike the Greens so much as ideological opponents that they're not capable of actually looking at what the Greens amendment says or does with a clear mind and with an actual, with a view to what it actually does. So, for example, with the hate speech laws, the Greens proposed a bill where the hate speech laws would have actually been either had mandatory sentencing for children removed or actually completely scrapped. And One Nation basically voted against those amendments because they just looked at where they were coming from. They're like, oh, the Greens are proposing that, we hate the Greens, therefore we oppose. I've got a track record already, and I know Craig would be the same, of being prepared to reach across the aisle, being prepared to be pragmatic and to work with other parties where you can find common ground, even if it's not on values, even if it's not on the reason you're voting a certain way. You need to be, like Fatima Payment voted against the hate speech laws. She is not someone who I would agree with on a lot of things, but a broken clock's right twice a day. And you have to be prepared to have conversations, to build relationships, to advocate and alliance build. And I think that that's where the Libertarians really have a big advantage, because we have the ability to look at outcomes, not who is proposing a particular bill, in a way that I think a lot of other parties don't.
Hey, Jordan, can I maybe just chip in there with a practical story?
Yeah,
when I resigned from the Liberal Party before, there's basically a committee of the crossbenchers and the non-aligned things, and often they'll talk and discuss things. And Adam Bance had this girl that was like one of his office managers, and she came around to see me to give me some paperwork about what was happening. And when she came into my office the first time, it was like she was walking into the devil's lair, sort of thing. I was like the Greens #1, arch enemy sort of thing for a long, long time. And she said the camera was all standoffish and was almost like frightened to touch anything, And I said to her, look, her name was Sophie. I said, Sophie, I bet you by the time this parliament has ended, there'll be some piece of legislation or motion or something that the Greens and myself, I must say this right, actually agree with. Right? And she sort of laughed and walked off, sort of thing. Anyhow, a couple of months later, there was the one where the Liberals had spent all this money. They were giving all this money away on COVID, which was unnecessary government expenditure. And actually, I seconded the motion from the Greens. So, please forgive me up there. Please forgive me for those listening, sort of sitting, right? But I actually second that motion with the Greens. So you've got to be able to talk to the other side, because numbers count. And that's one thing I think the Libertarians can do very well. We've also got to be able to target, if I'd say, disenfranchised Liberals. I know myself personally, so I know these guys. There's a lot of people on that Liberal Party that sit there that are very, very upset with some of the legislation that comes in. Now, we've seen Alec Antic and some of the others be prepared to cross the floor on issues. So you've got to actually sort of be targeting those other Liberal guys and say, whispering to them in the corridors, say, guys, come on, cross the floor with us, make a stand on this, come and support us on this, your home base, your supporters will love us. So that's a lot of things that we can do. It's not just being a dog in the manger down there. You've really got to be able to talk with, and the Labor Party are a waste of time, because it's execution at dawn. But you'll be able to talk with the Liberal Party people and talk with all the other crossbenchers, because sometimes you can get them to second motions and sometimes you can get to work together.
Thank you very much, Linton, for that question. Now, we do have a question in the comments from AIK, who asks, what is your position on AUKUS, the Australia, UK, US alliance? I might start off by going to Jordan.
Look, if I was a betting man, and from time to time I have been in the past, I would be putting money on us never receiving those submarines. It's pretty clear Trump's fairly uncomfortable with the deal. When he was asked about it after he was elected, he was like, what's AUKUS? Like, he clearly, it's not a big priority for him. And I think he views the idea of, sharing or selling US technology to us as not, and certainly to the UK as well, as a pretty fraught exercise and maybe not something he's that interested in. I think that that money, and it's obviously started off as $1 figure and it's already turned into a massive, massive blowout. And I think that's just going to keep growing. I'm not going to name names, but I know people who are involved in managing that project from our side, and they are dismayed at how badly managed it's been. And I think that we would be much better off cutting our losses, not continuing down the garden path and throwing good money after bad. And I think that that money that's been committed could be practical deterrent and defence of Australia as an island country in our region. I think that we don't need to cut defence spending, but we also don't need to boost up defence spending. We need to spend the money we've got in the defence budget better than we do. So that's my view. I think AUKUS does show nuclear energy in Australia. If we're happy to have nuclear submarines, we should be happy to have commercial nuclear energy. But I just think it's a pipe dream. I don't think it's going to happen.
And Jordan, this question is also for you from Exiled Aussie on YouTube. Asks, how is it possible that Victoria's new hate speech laws apply to all people in Australia and not just people in Victoria? And I'll come to Craig Kelly on this one after you go, Jordan.
Yeah, that's okay. So it would be easy to be confused, Exiled Aussie. That's actually not the case. It's just that the federal government passed hate speech laws at almost the same time as the Victorian Parliament passed their social cohesion laws, which are very similar in effect. So actually, the best argument against hate speech laws federally is that the federal government shouldn't be proposing those laws at all, that it should be leaving criminalisation of what it says are violent crimes or whatever to the state governments. So actually, the Victorian hate speech laws can apply extra judicially outside Victoria if the person being offended or insulted is in Victoria. So the target of the conduct allegedly is in Victoria. And that's pretty accepted as something. Victoria can regulate things that happen outside Victoria if it relates to Victoria or Victorian citizens. So that there's two elements to it. There's two sets of legislation which are very similar. And the Victorian legislation has some what are called long arm provisions where it can kind of reach outside Victoria to apply to people who are said to be undertaking conduct in, in Victoria if the technology is basically online.
Craig, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe similar laws passed in New South Wales quite recently as well. Is this correct? And did you have anything to say on those laws?
Yeah, look, there were similar laws passed in New South Wales, and there's massive duplication in these things to start with, federal laws and state laws, and on these things. And firstly, they're completely and utterly unnecessary. We already have enough laws that protect these things about what you would call true hate speech. And just remember that federal law, often the discussion gets lost in the details. It has changed so many basic, what we could consider freedoms. All you have to do now to be courted, the law basically so-called gives special rights to protected groups, right? Now, they're just not people with disabilities or people based on a particular racial background. This also now goes to people of a certain political persuasion. That is a protected group, people of political persuasion, under the legislation. And all you have to do to fall guilty of that law is to say something, even if you say it in good faith, and you mean you're not going to cause any harm, or you're not going to upset anyone. It is the apprehension in the person's mind that hears it. If they have an apprehension that will result in force being used against them, and it's not physical violence, it's force, which is a much lower threshold, you can spend 5 to 7 years in jail. Now, this is completely and utterly absurd, this legislation. And yet, this is what the Liberal Party joined in hands with the Labor Party to vote for. And we've seen, it's already laws on the books, but we haven't seen, I believe, anything being done with this law because the election campaign, because if people saw the examples of how this law will be applied, they'd be up in arms and there'd be calls to repeal it. But so you watch after the election campaign, this law will start to be enforced, and it'll be a major impediment to free speech in Australia. And that's why I said earlier, if we're successful, one of the first things on day one of that parliament, we'd be introducing legislation to have that repealed.
Now, Tyler, I'm not sure of the state of hate speech laws or censorship laws in South Australia. What's happening in South Australia? Do you have similar laws to what's passed in New South Wales and Victoria? And if not, what will you be doing to prevent it if elected?
Look, I don't believe that we're in the same place yet. But having said that, the direction of where hate speech laws are going in South Australia, in general, are obviously deeply concerning. We can see that that's essentially a case of having protected weaponized speech being used against entities that they don't want to be using that speech. So I'm deeply concerned, Preston, and obviously free speech underpins all other human rights. So property rights and free speech rights are essentially the underpinning foundational positions that bring forth the rest of the human rights that we all enjoy here. So in terms of the ability for you to express yourself openly and honestly and in a manner that you feel is appropriate, and as Craig has said, we have appropriate hate discrimination laws and incitement to violence laws already. What we can see here is I guess, attempts more to choke down the ability of everyday Australians to have meaningful, politically charged conversations. So I'm deeply concerned with the direction of where we're going. I'm very thankful for people like Jordan and people like Craig that are already calling attention to this stuff, and to see the weaponisation of speech like we've seen in the UK. It's not something that we can afford to ignore in Australia. So I'm deeply concerned, and I'm proud to take up the fight and to champion free speech for all Australians, because that underpins everything else that we hold dear. And to think that people have their personal space invaded by a law enforcement agency over a Facebook post is something that we all would have laughed about 10 years ago. Well, it's plainly evident that it's not a laughing matter any longer. So I'm proud to be a part of that fight to push back the borders for free speech in Australia. So deeply concerned where we're going, but proud to stand up for rights in Australia.
Tyler, I want to stick with you for a moment. If I was in South Australia, you are the person I would want representing me in the Senate. And of course, if elected, you will be representing all Australians. For coming on to have a chat with us tonight. And for people who are maybe listening to the recording or listening to YouTube or Facebook, how can people get in touch with you? How can they vote for you in South Australia? And what is something that you would like to say to South Australians as they go to the polls this Saturday?
Yeah, no worries. So obviously we've got a very active Facebook page and a very active Twitter page, which is the Libertarian South Australia. So anybody who wants to get involved, we would very much encourage them to reach out. As I said before, it's not a light thing to step forward and to be a number one candidate for a political party. So I'm completely honoured to represent the people of South Australia and the Libertarians of South Australia. And I think that I hold to libertarian ideals, and the party doesn't just espouse these ideals, but they actually live them in reality. So it's politics is something that people tend to stay away from. Well, I'm very encouraged to be part of a principled and professional organisation, and I know that voting for the Libertarians in Australia and in South Australia means that we can continue to fight for those rights and those freedoms that we enjoy. So I've taken up the challenge to be a Senate candidate with a young family, and thankfully my wife has stepped up to the plate and is covering both sides of that parental responsibilities that I have at the moment. But as I said, I take this political candidacy very seriously. I'm very honoured to represent the people who vote for me. I think that I have a very principled application to life, and I look forward to the opportunity to live in those ideals and to demonstrate those ideals and to be a libertarian leader that we need in Australia and in South Australia. So I'll continue to encourage people to flock to our banner. If the self-determination of your life is what matters to you and the ability for you to steer your life and be in control of the directions of yourself and your family members and those who are under your love and care and responsibility, then please put a number 1 on the left-hand side of the Senate paper. We've only got upper house candidates in South Australia. So again, that's more of a call to have more people get involved in the party and to throw their hat in the ring with us, because we'll certainly be looking for lower house candidates when we come to a state election next year. So please, reach out on Facebook, reach out on Twitter. If you've got a copy of our How to Vote cards, my phone number is on there. If you're in South Australia, we're at the West Oak Hotel on Saturday night for the after-election party. Come there, guys, and please get around us and get around the branch culture. We have a wonderful collection of people that are getting together. It has been fortnightly for the last few weeks. Obviously, we'll have a big one this Saturday night, and then potentially have a bit of a break for a little bit. But other than that, please flock to the city on Saturday night. Please make sure you put the Libertarians on the left-hand side, column A in South Australia. And thank you to everybody for defending democracy and all those things that we hold ideal and important in Australia. And thanks very much for hosting this space, and for everybody listening. Thank you very much for listening to myself and Jordan and Craig and the other speakers. Thanks for all your questions. Thanks for all your participation. I'm certainly open to your advice and to a message and to criticism or to encouragement or to anything else. So democracy is supposed to be a free market of ideals where people pick out the best ideas for themselves and they want to live those ideas. So I'm proud to represent a party that I think has the best ideas for policy in Australia, guys. Thank you very much.
And make sure you follow Tyler. If you didn't get a chance to ask Tyler a question tonight, leave a comment, DM him. He is very much accessible and he's very much willing to talk to people and listen to what's going on, what the issues they are facing. So follow Tyler, Libertarian Senate Candidate for South Australia. Next, I want to ask Craig a very similar question. Craig, for those listening to the recording, for those on Facebook or YouTube, and maybe who haven't heard of you before, since before this space tonight, tell us a little bit about your mission going into the Senate, what you want to achieve, and how people can help make that a reality, and how they can vote for you on Saturday.
Yeah, first, look, thanks for that. I really want to get back into that federal parliament because I have unfinished business after the COVID era. I saw what the parliament did during that COVID era, how they really let the Australian people down, how they went against, how they abused human rights, how they let the bureaucrats run over, many of the politicians in this country. I would like to get back and hold many of these people that were involved in that to account. I want to expose the fraud of this net zero that we've had, and I want to push for a Bill of Rights to make sure that Australians' free speech is protected, and also that the abuses of human rights that we saw happening during the COVID era never, ever can happen again any time in our history going forward. And that's got to be involved in arguing for changing the Constitution and improve the referendum. So I'm honoured to be here working with the Libertarian Party with so many great people I've met across the nation. And Tyler, I haven't met Tyler, but the great work that he's doing over in South Australia, flying the flag. If people want to contact me, look, the best place is on my Twitter or my X account there. That's the one that I'm most active on. I used to have a Facebook page, but during the last election, some arts graduate at Facebook decided that I would be banned, and they actually incinerated my Facebook page, destroyed everything I had on it. Some places I had personal photos as well, because they alleged that I wasn't following their so-called community standards, which we now know and we're absolutely 100% clear were being dictated by the Biden regime, that were absolutely 100% false. and the community standards was mis and disinformation. So Twitter or X is the best place to find me. Just Craig Kelly. I'm sure I'll come up.
Thank you very much, Craig, and I look forward to speaking to you on many more of these spaces. If you didn't get a chance to ask Craig a question tonight, send him a message, follow him, tweet at his handle, or leave a comment in the comments of this space and tag in that as well. Now, Jordan Dittloff, who is our lead Senate candidate for Victoria, has unfortunately had some last-minute connection problems. But I also want to say that personally, I have seen how hard Jordan has been working over the last 13 months. He came onto a space about 12 months ago, and that's where I met him for the first time. And since then, he has been open to talking to all of us here on this platform. He has inspired many other politicians to come onto this platform and start talking to us on spaces. And that's just on X. In the real world, he has been working even harder. I have seen him for the last few weeks almost go non-stop for weeks at a time, talking to people. I've been a fly on the wall while he's been talking to people about their real world issues, people who are struggling in the current system, people who really are looking for a change, and I cannot personally recommend Jordan Dittloff enough. So also, if you didn't get a chance to ask Jordan a question tonight, tag him in the comments and send him a message as well. Now, I want to say thank you, of course, to Jordan, to Craig, and to Tyler, our lead Senate candidates in Victoria, New South Wales, and South Australia. I also want to thank everyone who left a comment in the comments section on Twitter, on YouTube, and on Facebook. I want to say thank you to everyone who came up and asked a question. Of course, if you didn't get a chance to ask a question, leave a question in the comments section. And this is not the only space the Libertarian Party will be doing. If all goes well, we will be talking to one or more senators in a space very, very soon after this election. So make sure, if you haven't already, when you go to vote, vote one Libertarian. Whatever state you are in, you can vote for a Libertarian senator. Now, I want to thank everyone once more. My name's Preston, and this space is authorised by S. Payton of the Libertarian Party, Docklands, Victoria.